Hey, everybody, it's Brent. Welcome back to the Having Had podcast. It's been a little while, 4 months, I think, since I put an episode out. Happy to be back. Had a little surgery and long recovery, a lot going on. Got a great episode today with my friend John Ostrin. He's a front of house sound engineer. I bet you've been to his show where he was mixing. Long career. Just to rattle off a few of the artists: TOTO-Oingo, Boingo-Pat, Benatar, the mighty Van Halen, Sammy Hagar, Ringo Starr, Brian Setzer-Jason, Bonham-Boz, Skaggs, John Legend. Also mixed Alanis Morissette, Bonnie Raitt, Bruce Hornsby. There's a lot more. Great conversation. We get kind of deep in the weeds. If you're not an audio person, there's a little bit of it that, you might get lost in the weeds a bit, and that's okay. But great stories. Just a good talk with a good guy. I just wanted to throw something out there. Kind of hit me this past couple of weeks. Given the division we have in our country and our world right now, and everybody's picked a team, and there's something a really wise man told me a bunch of years ago, which was simply, he said, we're all just struggling human beings. It doesn't matter from the richest to the poorest, from the sickest to the most well, from whatever extreme to the other. We're all, to some degree, just struggling human beings trying to find our way. And after I lost my dad, it was 3 years ago this month, when I returned to work, I was working on a TV series, and one morning was talking to a Teamster. He had given me condolences, and I didn't know the guy that well. He was an older, wise guy, wise man. I kind of came to know him as. And, I was sharing the experience of going through the last week or two of my dad's life with him. And he said something kind of offhandedly that it didn't immediately hit me. But after I walked away from that conversation, it was really heavy. He just said, at the end of the day, we're all just walking each other home. We're all just trying to help each other to the end of our ride here. And I was reminded of that by something last week, actually something I read. And it has just been in the front of my mind when I wake up every day. I'm thinking about it all day. And it is something that allows me to give everybody a lot more space, and to not have to be right, and to understand that, we are just struggling human beings trying to help each other out at the end of the day. And so for whatever it's worth, I wanted to throw that out there. Maybe one person out there will hear that and it'll make their day a little bit better. Or that's something you can tuck away and, put in your little tool bag for as you keep traveling this journey we're all on. But I'm super grateful to get to still do this deal. I'm just fitting them in where I can. I've got a couple more lined up, hopefully, to knock out in the next few weeks, and we'll see where it goes. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, mash all the buttons, do all the things to help me kind of grow this thing. Still just have the singleness of purpose to try to do a little bit of good. If anybody listens to this that gets any good out of it, it's worth doing. If it improves anything for anybody, I'm happy I did it. So thank you guys. Please enjoy this episode with my buddy John, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you. Hey everybody, welcome to Having Had podcast. I think this is episode 9. If I'm not mistaken. It's been a while. We're going to jump right into it. My guest today is my friend John Ostrin. He's a front of house engineer for many bands that you've probably enjoyed. I'm going to do something a little different and start off, since I already mentioned what you do, I'm going to start off with a question that is purely of interest to me. I always like to ask, especially with people that are touring professionals, what your hook was. Like as a kid, most of us grew up where concerts were the greatest thing in the world. And what was your first show or maybe a couple of shows that you went to that set the hooks in you, that just let you know, man, this is what I would like to do?
So I'm that guy. My happy place was a rock concert. We went and saw everybody growing up from 1978 to 84. But I never had a moment where this is what I wanted to do. But having said that, here's my experience. The third show I ever saw was Van Halen at the LA Sports Arena. It was their second album. And our seats were 5 rows behind front of house. And the guy showed up with a stack of tickets and said that our seats were obstructed view and we were going to move. They were going to move us over to house left. And all my friends were like, "Oh, cool, we're going closer." And for some reason, I was like, "Wait, I want to watch this guy and see what he does." Out of curiosity. Fast forward to 1981, we went Rush Moving Pictures tour at the Forum. We went both nights, and I don't remember if it was first or second night, but we sat. And I always had to sit in the front 3, 4, 5 rows. That was my thing. So we ended up Life Before Barricades with our hands on the stage, looking up at Alex for the encore. And that was probably the most iconic moment of like, I need to be involved in this. But what we would do is after a show, we would sit in our seats for about 20 minutes, as long as we could, and watch the roadies pack up. And I never got backstage. I never went backstage. I never knew what that whole world was like. But I think it was implanted, but it wasn't an avenue I was actually pursuing. So.
Gotcha. Yeah. My story is, and this is the reason I ask this. I grew up a punk rock and hardcore kid and loved metal, and, grew up. Van Halen was Kiss was my first favorite band, and then moved into Van Halen pretty quickly thereafter. But in I think February of 1990, and we'll jump into this in just a second, but I know you through recovery, and
Right.
I had been, I think, out of treatment for 2 months. I was about 5 or 6 months sober, and snuck into a club here in my hometown because I was underage. It was a 21 and up club that on half the club was a strip club and the other half was like an 80s metal club. It was called Gucci's and the $1 Million Sandpiper. Gucci's was the rock club and the $1 Million Sandpiper was the strip club. And
was there a laundromat in the back too or something?
No, well, there might have been.
All right.
There was a band house there. I remember that, where the bands would play for a week at a time,
Right.
3 sets a night. But this was a big show that they had. It was Pantera playing, and Pantera was on the circuit here. They played, through the 80s. They were kind of a hair metal band, which was popular at the time. But they had just finished recording, like the week they came here, Cowboys from Hell, which was their first really heavy album. And nobody knew that yet. But I just we decided to go sneak in, me and another sober buddy, not exactly sober behavior. We went and snuck in I don't know how we got in, but we got in and we hid ourselves over in a corner, stage left. And I was watching Grady Champion was Dimebag's tech. And I was watching him, running all the effects off stage, riding all these things during solos and doing guitar changes. And I'm like, that's his job. Like, that's his fucking job. And I had been to a meeting, I think the night before, where we talked about, you can go anywhere and do anything and stay sober as long as you have a good enough reason for being there.
Right.
And I realized that night I was 18 years old and I was like, I could do this because I'm sober. I could do this because I couldn't have done it loaded the way I drank and used. I couldn't have done it. And fast forward for me, less than 3 years after that date, I was on a Pantera tour working for the opening act, doing the whole stage for a band called Crowbar. So Now, I just want to briefly go through. I know did you grow up in Ventura? You from there?
No, I'm from West LA.
From West
So
LA? How'd you grow up? What
I
childhood look like for you?
childhood was white privilege, wealth. Not super wealth, but dad did really well. I'm one of four kids. I have two brothers and a sister. We grew up in West LA. For those of you who know it, kind of in between Westwood Village and UCLA, and everything was walking distance. And we all had. I grew up with a huge group of friends. All of our parents, if they weren't drug addicts, they were divorced. We all had older siblings, so we had brothers and sisters showing us the ropes, and we did everything together. Parties on the weekends, school, concerts, the beach, all of that. And um, like life wasn't great at home, although it wasn't really talked about. So my whole world was hanging out with my buddies. And to give you a little example, every weekend, whether we were going out into a certain part of Westwood and spending all our weekends playing arcade games and running around and meeting girls, and I'm talking young, 12, 13 years old. Every Friday and Saturday night, we would go to the 12 o'clock midnight showing of The Song Remains the Same. And that would let out at 2 in the morning, and we would walk home a mile and a half. We were smoking weed. I grew up in an environment where we were getting loaded early. First joint I ever smoked, I was 10, which is, I used to say that with some kind of ha ha ha, but now I look at 10-year-olds and I'm just flabbergasted. And so by the time we were 12, 13, we knew what we were doing. We knew how to roll joints and smoke bong hits, and that was really our thing. And so we found this whole world based around music, getting high, camaraderie, puberty, and everything that goes with that, really. And so, I grew up there until I was 15, and then my folks split when I was 9. My mom sold the house when I was about 15, which was when I graduated junior high school. And then we moved to Santa Monica, and which meant I had to go leave the school district and go to a new school in Santa Monica, and that was a rough time because I didn't know anybody. It was a whole different culture with all the surfer kids than where I grew up, even though it was only 20 miles away. And so high school was kind of rough. I spent a lot of time alone and kind of going up to my old high school. The high school I would have gone to, I spent a lot of time there with those guys. But I will say overall, growing up was great. We all got our licenses at 16 and got, beat up cars and parties and just a lot of camaraderie, a lot of peer pressure, a lot of, I was younger. I was not younger. I grew up I was a little slower than the other kids physically. They were going through puberty a little quicker. They were more experienced with girls before than I was. So I had to kind of pretend quite a bit. So I had to find areas where I excelled. Like I excelled in the ocean, body surfing and boogie boarding, skiing. And I kind of felt like a leader of the gang when it came to rock shows. Like I knew where to get, I knew a scalping agency where I could get us third row seats to see Rush for $30 a ticket. The ticket that was priced at what, $8, $10, $12, and I knew how, so that was kind of my thing was, who are we going to see this week? Well, got this band Def Leppard, they're out. We're going to go see them, or Rainbow or Purple. I mean, you name it, we saw them all. So yeah, growing up, I'm going to leave it at that, was fond memories.
Well, you're the only other person. I got sober in the fall of '89 and started touring in my own little bands, maybe late '91 or '92, and did my first professional tour, full U.S. tour in '93 as a tech. And so my entire touring career was in after I got sober. And, I know a ton of sober touring professionals now, but it was kind of few and far between back in the early '90s, at least. But you're the only other person that I've ever met that got sober before they even got into the business and then spent their whole career in the business. So where'd you find bottom? What did that look like for you?
It was the end of 1984. I was in my second year at college at UC Santa Barbara. My mother had gotten clean 3 years earlier. And so the last couple of years of high school, she was really on me because she was sober now. And my older brother, who's also in recovery, was out of the house and doing his thing across the country. My younger brother's sober as well. He was just kind of experimenting and getting into his thing. And so when I went off to college, it was free reign. A lot of drinking, a lot of cocaine. My bottom came, the last week of my using was rough. And I was on about a 5-day cocaine bender because it was something that took place at school. And I came home for Thanksgiving and I was 118 pounds. I hadn't showered in a few days. My eyes were black and blue and sunken in. And I had a couple bites of dinner with my mom and my brother. And my mom sat me on the couch and she knew. She'd been praying for it for a while. And she 12-stepped me, very simply. Asked if I wanted to be happy, and because I was miserable. I mean, beyond miserable. And I said, yeah. And she said, are you willing to give up drugs to be happy? And I said, yeah. No. Yeah. No. Maybe. And I did that, and I went to bed, and I did that for 4 hours, back and forth in my head. And I woke up the next morning, and my folks were waiting for me downstairs with my backpack, took me to a therapist, and I went to rehab. And I did 30 days in rehab in Pasadena and came out with, what am I going to do now? And so the first 3 months of my sobriety, I just stayed sober and went to meetings. And a buddy of mine, I was trying to be a drummer. My brother was the real drummer. He still is. And a buddy of mine was a guitar player. We were hanging out, and I said, what are you doing? He says, I'm going to start. I just enrolled in a recording engineering school in North Hollywood because compact disc technology was starting, and he wanted to get into that part of the industry. And I thought, wow, that sounds interesting. I'm going to enroll. And my dad said, yeah, you can go to school, but you're going to pay your own way. And I was like, what, me? I have to pay my own way? What? Oh, okay. So I went back to the hospital and I got a job at the hospital at the rehab, working as a technician on the teenage adolescent unit. And I put myself through school for a year. And at the end of the school, I didn't understand anything they taught us about recording engineering. Not a fucking thing. But at the end, he had an elective course on live audio. And we walked into this room and he had the board set up and he had a band up on stage and the PA was stacked and everything was mic'd. And the band played and everybody got like 2 minutes to work on the board. And so every 5 people, as the faders crept up and up and up and up, because that's all people do is push up, and the teachers got the master coming down. I got up there and I was the only one that started bringing things down, and I started reaching for EQ. And he goes, no, that's too advanced. Don't do that. After the class, he took me aside and he said, you've got a knack for this. I can tell. And I want to encourage you to pursue this. And I was like, okay. Still kind of blind to it. You know what I mean? Still not thinking, I'm going to end up mixing Van Halen at the LA Forum one day. I'm like, okay. And to continue the story, I got a couple shitty jobs. And a friend of mine's uncle, who was a live engineer, who at the time was working for the Allman Brothers, called me and said, I'm going on a little California tour with this artist. Do you want to come with me? It's going to be for 3 weeks. You're going to drive the Ryder truck. I'm going to show you how to set up. You're going to help me set up audio. And we're going to do this. And I said, fuck yeah. And we did 3 weeks. Came back to the audio company, which was Schubert Systems Group at the time we were in Gardena. We emptied the truck and I met a guy who handed me a W-2 and I filled it out. And that was that.
There you go. That
was it. And I just stumbled into it. And like I told you yesterday, I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about audio.
It's crazy that you mentioned that you worked as a tech at the treatment center, because when I got out and graduated treatment, I just stayed every day. I still went up. It was my only safe place. I knew I was going to get loaded if I didn't stay as close to
Yes.
that place as possible.
Yes.
And I begged long enough that they put me on staff as soon as I was legal and could jump through the few hoops they needed to, because I dropped out of high school to go to treatment. I wasn't going to graduate anyway with my class. So I got my GED while I was in treatment, or right after I got out. So I worked as a tech up until touring took off completely for me. I was working as a tech at the treatment center, adolescent treatment center.
Yeah, that was a real scary time because I was actually seeing a therapist at the same time and she was working there. And after about a year, I was really afraid to leave because at that point, so now I had put about a year and a few months sobriety together. Everything was recovery, going to 2-3 meetings a day, everything was. And so now it was time to like take it into the world rather than hide out in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was petrifying. And to think to go from that to a friggin' tour bus and go live in that world, I mean, it's, if you think about it, it's almost a parallel shift from being with a bunch of crazy teenagers who are huffing hairspray just to get high in their rooms to go live on a tour bus with, 25, 30 roadies.
With essentially graduate level alcoholics and addicts.
But to your point, what you said earlier, I knew when I got on the road, because I was so stoked from when I started, that if I smoke a joint, I'm giving this up.
Yep.
And that kept me sober for a long time.
Yeah.
I didn't know where it was going to lead, but I knew I found something here. I love it. And I'm not willing to give this up. And and it was a really good lesson that I like a lot of newcomers to learn is what I'm going to sacrifice if I pick up again.
Yep.
So
I was fully aware also that I excelled in some ways just because I was in recovery, because especially early on, starting with some baby bands that couldn't afford to pay crew a lot, that oftentimes would have their buddies out on tour with them. I was trying to be professional, and
I'm gonna ask you a question because we'll get to this later. Do you think it was because you just because of being an addict, you're like, I'm going to become a workaholic and get perfect at this?
Oh, absolutely. That was an aspect of it.
Yeah.
But also having the tools that you pick up in recovery and just being a responsible, accountable person,
right.
At least back then in the early 90s up through the mid 90s, nowadays you go backstage at a major tour at an arena and there's a CrossFit gym and a juice bar and a AA meeting and yoga.
Right.
And that was not the case
right.
30 years ago
right.
at all.
Yeah, not the case at all.
So did you just do local sound gigs around LA for a while and kind of cut your teeth that way? Or?
No. The company I worked for was a small family-owned company, and we had about 3 or 4 accounts. And we could manhandle probably 3 tours at once. Now, when I say tours, back then we're talking amphitheater shed tours, where we were hanging maybe 12 boxes aside and 8 subs aside and wedges and just 2 consoles, opening acts, shared desks, nothing wireless. This is 86.
Yeah.
And so our accounts were artists like Al Jarreau, David Sanborn, Toto, the Doobie Brothers, Bonnie Raitt. Music I was not into at all. I mean, I was into Toto a bit, but it was not my vibe.
Yeah.
And so, the boss would say, okay, you're going out with these 2 guys. You're going to go out on Al Jarreau. And the opening act is Shaka Khan, and we're going to dial up the mix, and you're going to run faders for Shaka because they wanted to go have dinner. They didn't want to sit at the desk all day, And then that became, okay, well, Shaka's going to go out on a little tour. Here's a board. Here's some microphones, cables. Have fun.
Good luck.
And the keyboard player would teach me how to EQ drums, that kind of thing. My boss was a real champion of, I'm going to throw you in the fire, and you're going to sink or swim. And so my touring was working with guys who were involved in being the innovators of audio. who would not only teach me, they wouldn't teach me about mixing, but they would teach me about maintaining gear, proper cable path, loading and unloading trucks, proper way of packing cable trunks. Stuff was going wrong all the time. So you had to have a soldering station and a work area because you were fixing stuff every day. You had to be on point during a show because at any given moment you were going to lose an XLR line.
Oh yeah.
All the time, and that was the excitement of the show. And it was very calm environments. It was, shows that weren't all that loud and contemporary music and the audience were appropriate. So there wasn't a lot of the, there wasn't the backstage scene. There wasn't giving out passes. There wasn't, it was fairly civilized. But the guys I grew up working under were sticklers, and after shows on the bus, it was, what did you learn? What'd you do wrong? Oh, by the way, you left the camlock tails sitting, so they're going to be in your bunk with you, you're sleeping with these tonight. Seriously. The hard way of learning how to deal with, 4 loaders in the truck and how to give instructions, all that stuff. And then coming home, emptying the gear, maintaining it, taking all the tape off, all that kind of stuff. And, the Gamble EX had just come out about a year later. We were all Gamble consoles, so we weren't, for all you audio nerds, we weren't even using graphic EQ racks on stage. We were doing everything on board. So I learned how to EQ stuff with parametrics. Guys would teach me little bits and bobs. But if you wanted to learn, like when they would go to dinner and it was that time in between sound check and doors, I'd go out front and I'd look at how they EQ'd drums or vocals, and I would write stuff down. And I thought, well, you put a 421 on a tom or a floor tom. You put this, an M88 back in the day on a kick drum. 57s went on guitars, period. 58s were vocal mics. That's just how things work. And these guys I worked with were way more brilliant than I was. I mean, they were building consoles. They understood circuit boards and all that kind of stuff that I honestly don't understand and never will. And so I did. The first 14 months I worked for the company, I was on the road 11 months. $400 a week, $450 a week. Per diem was awesome. $25 a day per diem was fucking amazing. And then I got my own apartment, and then I bought a car, and I mean, it was like, and I knew that the progression was to get to the mixing console. That was the goal, and that was the motivation, and that was their support. Get to the board.
Yep. So what was your first break?
So here's my first break. After doing some opening act stuff, Toto was our big account. Now, Toto back in late 80s weren't touring US. They toured Europe and Japan and Asia. And they were so sophisticated that they carried consoles everywhere they went. All the band gear, all the consoles. The keyboard mixing rig was a 40-channel Gamble console. Just for the keyboards. It was a really amazing, intricate stage setup. Jeff Porcaro was still alive, by the way, back then. This was 90. So my boss, Dirk Schubert, who had mixed Toto for the previous 4, 5, 6 years, was already inked to do Bruce Hornsby's next tour. And so they had a little powwow, and it was Jeff Porcaro, actually, who said, give the kid a shot. I was 25. He knew me from rehearsals. And Steve Lukather walked up to me, and I don't know if Steve Lukather is a pretty intense guy. Okay, he's a guitar player, singer for Toto. And he walked up to me and he said, kid, you think you can handle it? I don't know where this came from, Brent, but I looked him square in the eye and I said, give me the shot and I'm going to blow your fucking mind. Talking out my ass. And so we rehearsed. So the sound company, by then we had moved to North Hollywood. We had our shop and we had 3 rehearsal rooms. So Toto set up in the big room, rehearsing for a couple of weeks for the tour. And then Dirk set me up with the Gamble EX in the shop and a little PA. And I started mixing front of house in the shop because we were shipping all the gear to Europe. And I got to spend a week and a half, working on the mix. And Dirk had showed me some tricks, and all this. the key that I had that I'd like to tell other engineers, and I don't know how this happened, but I had the mix in my head before I ever got the console turned on. So I knew where I was going. I just didn't know how to get there. And I got there in rehearsals. And the band actually, after the first few shows of the tour, showed me some studio tricks that they knew, because they were, if you know anything about Toto, fucking studio geniuses. They taught me more about audio in 2 days than I've ever learned since, and so that was my big break, was mixing Toto, and which leads into another big break, which I'll get into later. But we went off and our first show, the first 3 shows in Europe were sold out arenas, 20,000 apiece, where the crowd was like doing the wave before house lights dropped. And when I talk about being nervous and shitting in my pants, I was shitting in my pants that whole tour. And they would, they would listen to mixes, and then they would help me, and they would come out front and work on stuff for sound checks. And it was amazing. We did 2 runs in Europe. We did Japan. We did a festival tour. I broke my cherry doing headlining 100,000 people festivals. 25 years old. I was, and I fucking loved it. And it was I will say it was some of the best mixing I've ever done. Even just that first out of the gate tour I did. So yeah.
What console?
Gamble EX. And it was a 56 channel desk, which included effects returns. I had a rack of a ton of shit, and we were tapped at like 42, 44 inputs, which was a lot back then.
Yeah.
So I had to double assign channels to work as like cassette recorder playback, This is before, I think CDs, I may have had a CD player to play walk-in music, but most of it was on cassette tape. And we were doing a lot of bus assigning. So here's an example. Toto had 5 people in the band singing, and any one of them would be a lead vocalist. So Dirk taught me, you take 4 vocals, you send them to a stereo subgroup. You take that subgroup, you go through a stereo compressor, you return that to a pair of channels, and then you take that pair of channels, which we would nickname a background remix, and send that to your harmonizer and reverb. And so you'd have the group of vocals compressed as a group. Now, if one of them drops out to sing lead, you now manually have to unassign it from the group, assign it to the stereo bus, turn on the effects returns, and it was, it was all this. It was a marathon throughout a show. So when I transferred to a digital console, I was like, oh, I could do this in a scene? Oh, hell yeah, let's go. So it was a lot of that, which I love. I miss doing all that kind of stuff. But it was a lot of effects, a lot of mixing, a lot of, and here's the one thing I want to go back to what we talked about before. And this will apply to the next thing we talk about, hopefully, is I knew as a fan that the most impactful thing I could do when those house lights drop is to hit the audience and make them gasp. The top of the show and the end of the show. And I'd come out with that. You know what I mean? And not let the cat out of the bag. I used to be one of those knuckleheads that would turn on the PA during line check in between opening act, and I got in trouble for that from another sound guy. It's like, you're letting the cat out of the bag, bro. So I was a fan who knew what the audience was tripping on, and assuming they were high, hopefully, or in some kind of, something. And my job now is to wow the hell out of them, and I still try to do that. Yeah.
Well, early on, was being sober through those years with Toto, and I guess and moving forward, was like I had multiple experiences. I'll just pick one. I was on, well, we'll just take the Pantera, for example. I was hard partying, just
Right.
wide open, 24/7, entire band and crew. and pretty much the whole package, top to
Yeah.
bottom. And I was working for like the main support band, and I would help Grady, the guy who I'd seen, Gucci's in the $1 Million Sandpiper here. I asked him to be my guitar tech sponsor. And he's like, what? Because I ended up on a tour with him. You know, that first big tour I did was Crowbar opening for Pantera. For, you know, a few shows we did a couple weeks with him. And I said, man, just teach me everything you know. So we would get done. You know, I'm done way early, and I would be on the side of the stage with him during Pantera's whole set. I'm helping him put Dom's guitars away. As he's done with guitars, I'm wiping stuff down and packing it away. And then I would help him tear the rig down. And he was stage managing as well. So by the end of the night, I would go help him pull the dressing room wardrobe cases out of the dressing room. Well, it's full party mode, you know, 30 minutes to an hour after the show in their dressing room. And, you know, anybody who knows that band knows that Don, the guitar player, had a shot called a Blacktooth Grin. And it was a triple shot of Crown with a splash of Coke on it. And everybody, you know, if he said the deal on their tours was drink it or wear it. Like, and if he called for a round of shots, everybody had to do a round. We were in there getting dressing room cases one night. And, he was, I don't know, there's a bunch of guests there. I think the Alice in Chains guys were there. It was like a huge, you know, who's who in the dressing room. We were probably in LA. I don't remember. And I just happened to be right next to him getting this case, and he threw his arm around me and handed me a shot. I'm like, no, man, I don't drink. And I knew him, but not super well. And thankfully, the singer, Philip, who was you know, a friend, I knew him from here in Louisiana before touring with him. He thankfully bailed me out and looked at Dime and was like, no, man, your boy really doesn't drink.
Right.
And he let me off the hook. And anybody who did Pantera tours back then knows he didn't let people off the hook.
Right.
But he never did that to me again after that.
Yeah.
But, you know, for me, I was aware from very early on that I might be the only representative of recovery, you know, that people would see. And it worked in my benefit, you know, to give me another layer of accountability, you know, that I'm responsible to be an example of what is possible after active addiction and alcoholism. So what was did you have any experiences, you know, especially in the early years of touring like that?
I think I got really lucky because I was vocal about it, that I'm an addict. I'm sober. And that usually actually back then was more of a repellent. I didn't have any peer pressure. Matter of fact, a lot of guys had my back. The Toto guys had my back. A lot of the crew guys had my back, and I wasn't, up until Toto, I wasn't prone to tours that were really too much out of control. It was actually pretty tame. Toto, you wouldn't think of it, and they wouldn't mind me saying so, were some of the hardest partying guys I'd ever fucking met. And not only partying, but days off. If we'd go to a city in Asia, they wanted to go to the darkest, most dangerous part of town. Let's go to Snake Alley and drink rattlesnake blood and then go to the whorehouse, you know? Or what, I mean, just, and so, but no, they never, and guys would do that. They're like, no, Joe doesn't do it, you know? But what I would do is I would sit in the back lounge while everyone was smoking weed, just to be around it. I had a rule. My only rule was if I saw cocaine, I ran the other way. The drinking never bothered me because that was not even attractive anyhow. And the pot thing, I thought I could be around it and miss it, but not do it. But I was still too young and immature to think I was going to help somebody or make a difference. I was just trying to survive. And I had my eye on the prize of my career. And I knew obviously by then, yeah, I smoke one joint, this goes away. Yeah. I still don't know how people tour and get high. It is beyond me how people do it. Yeah. I couldn't have done it. So I got lucky, I think, in that sense. But what I would do is I would sneak off and go to meetings. And I was really ashamed and embarrassed, so I wouldn't let people see me. I'd leave the hotel making sure nobody was seeing, because they're going to say, where are you going to go? Where are you headed? I'm going to an AA meeting. But then I found when I would say I'm going to an AA meeting, they're like, oh, yeah, we don't, bye-bye. We don't want any part of that.
Later.
And this is in those days, obviously, of you had to check into the hotel, open the drawer, find this big yellow book called the phone book, thumb it, call some old dude in, Oklahoma who's going to come pick you up in his 67 Chevy and drive you to a meeting,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I got accustomed to like living on the road and not really working a program, not staying sane, just being a workaholic and just putting it all into the job, which is why I excelled so fast in what I do, I think. Yeah.
It's the balance is always, I mean, I'm 52 now and I started touring at, full time at 20.
Yeah.
Did 15 years of that. Now I've got 17 plus years in the film business, and it's the same type of work. When you're at work, it's all encompassing and there's zero balance. It's just work. And then you finish a tour or finish a movie and it's like you just launch off the edge of a cliff into, normal life. And then you got to get your feet, it's like a baby deer learning to walk again. It takes a while to adjust, and then boom, you're gearing up for the next job. So that balance is always, it's so awesome now. And I don't tour anymore, but I'm a part of several groups, of touring professionals that we meet, remotely on a weekly basis. And just to know I'm watching people tour, and to know that they have the accountability to a group of not only people in recovery on the same, getting saved from the same sinking ship that way, but the additional, common bond of understanding the uniqueness of this profession and how, and the unique challenges that it has for a person in recovery.
Yeah. A tour was never a time for me to stop and re-examine anything. Once the tour started, you're in it. You can re-examine when you get home if you have a long enough break in between tours. And I did that for so long that it wasn't until the pandemic, so 27, almost 30 years into the business, that I stopped and re-examined. And then decided, I wonder if there's a better way to be on the road and balance recovery. And I've had the same experience as you, that now I've found it. Because I now have a whole group of friends and people who do what we do, and we could talk about this stuff and apply it. And so now I can go on tour and interrupt that 2 days in, 3 days in. I've done 3 cities in a row. I'm a total asshole. I haven't talked to my wife. The band wants to kick my ass. I need to stop and evaluate and check back in. And it took me a long time, but I'm sure the road now is more conducive to it. I do think there's a difference between what it was like back in the 80s and 90s, that it was more insane. And it's crazy how the time flies by. It's like, oh my God. Like, while you and I are sitting here, I've done this 38 years. That's got to be wrong. I don't know how it's been 38 years, But what I made up for it on the road was I saw the world. I took advantage of, going to see every cathedral in Europe on a leg, going to experience Far East Asia, Australia, going to, all those experiences I soaked up. That's when I lived in the moment. As far as the gig went, I remember St. Louis because the seats were blue. You know what I mean? But my sponsor, my second sponsor always said that he believed that people who chose to go on tour, musician or roadie or whatever, were people who wanted to escape reality. And so it was a very similar substitution for drinking and drugging. Because you go on the road, like and everybody else knows, you don't have to make any decisions. Everything's done for you.
Yep.
Fuck, they feed us 3 times a day, give us money for food, book our hotels, tell us when we're getting picked up, and we still bitch and moan.
Yep. Just look at the day sheet. That's all you got to do.
Exactly.
So, from Toto, what was next on the list from there?
Okay, so here's the story. That is proof to me that there's a God. So we're in band rehearsals with Toto, and it's the last day, which is family and friends are going to come and sit in the room and watch the whole set. So we're a couple songs in. I'm in the shop. I'm mixing. Sounds fucking great. Guy walks in and says, "Hey, where's the bathroom?" I'm like, "First door on your right." He goes to the bathroom. As he's in the bathroom, my boss's wife walks out and looks at me and she goes, "Do you know who that is?" And I said, "Yeah, I know who that is. That's Eddie fucking Van Halen." Okay? Ed walks out and he stops and he's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm mixing the band." He goes, "Are you listening to the CD?" I said, "No, I'm mixing the band. There and there. This is my front of house desk. We're shipping it to Europe. I'm mixing the band." He goes, "That's fucking amazing." He didn't understand it. They'd never done that in band rehearsals with Van Halen. So he goes, "Huh." He leaves. He brings his guitar tech back, Matty Brock. And he says, "Do you mind if we hang with you and listen? Because I don't want to sit in there and listen and bored, And Ed sat with me for the whole set. And afterwards, I'm packing up and he's saying goodbye and he comes over to me and he says, "Have you ever mixed a band like Van Halen?" And in my fucking genius, it comes out of my mouth, says, "There's no band like Van Halen." Right? He goes, "Do you think you could mix?" I said, "Ed, you give me the shot, I'll blow your fucking mind." Same fucking line. He goes, "Give me your number. You never know. Just in case, you never know." So I give him my number, and he knows the office. A year later, I'm out on Pat Benatar doing. I didn't get to mix Pat Benatar when she was Pat Benatar. She did a blues album in 1990. So we did kind of this like nightclub, small venue type thing. So I'm at a gig in, somewhere in Rhode Island. And the house lights are about to drop. And this young girl comes from the production office and her hand is shaking. And I said, "What?" She goes, "Are you John Ostrin?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "I just got off the phone with Eddie Van Halen and he wants you to call him immediately." So Ed had to call the office, the sound company office, who had to look up in the itinerary the gig I was at to give him the phone number of the production office of the venue I was at, right? So I grab the damn note and I go run to the office. I take 10 steps away from the desk and the house lights drop. And I'm like, "Oh shit, I got to mix the show." How the fuck, you know what I mean? So I mix the show, gets to the last song, I play house music and I run to the office and I called Ed. And he goes, "Hey, we got a problem. We need a front of house engineer. Our previous engineer has priced himself out of the job. We're in rehearsals in LA. Are you in or are you out?" I said, "I'm fucking in." He goes, "Okay." He goes, "I got your itinerary. You got 2 days off in Baltimore. I want you to sit in your hotel room and wait by your phone. My manager, Ed Leffler, is going to call you." So I go to Baltimore. Day 2, my phone rings. It's Ed Leffler, who I didn't know at the time, but Ed Leffler was actually responsible for bringing the Beatles to America. Sidebar. Ed was Sammy's manager back in the day, and Sammy brought him in with Van Halen. So I'm going to tell you this story because this, I think, is kind of fun. Ed Leffler wasn't buying it. A 26-year-old kid getting ready to mix Van Halen. It was their third album. It was the For a Lawful Carnal Knowledge album. And it was going to be, a major tour. And he wasn't. Ed had told him, "This is my guy." He wanted to bring in a lot of young guys for that tour. And I did everything I could to sell myself, and I just didn't convince him. And he says to me at the end of the conversation, he says, "Well, what are you making out there on Pat Benatar?" I said, $1,300 a week. He says, "Great, you're hired." I met him a month later, and I said, "You could have had me for 1,000." So I get Van Halen. The next day, Benatar's tour gets canceled because of lack of ticket sales. The day after that, I fly to upstate New York to meet an audio analyst. The gear's already been selected. The whole tour's been prepped. The band's in rehearsals at Schubert's, and I saw them over there. And I was going to go back to LA and catch the last 2 days of band rehearsals before we went out and started the tour. And I walked in like king shit, but nervous as hell. And I met Sammy, and I met Ed and Al and Michael. And the band started playing in this small room. And I'm sitting on the couch, and Brent, I sat there and I thought, holy fuck. I was the loudest thing I've ever heard in my life. And I thought, what the fuck have I gotten myself into? And it was great. It was fucking amazing. I mean, I could tell stories about that tour forever. It was just, yeah. And
Where was your first show?
We did production. So here was the cool thing. The first leg was a shed leg. And I was the only one on the whole tour who had done amphitheaters. All these guys were metal guys. They had just done arena tours. So I had home field advantage. And I told the manager, I said, look, there's decibel limits in all these amphitheaters, so I just want you to be aware. And he says, not with Van Halen. It's in our contract. Dude, don't you worry about a thing. dB levels are obliterated. It's in the contract. So we started in Atlanta at Lakewood Amphitheater. We did 4 nights of production rehearsals. And the monitor engineer at the time was Jim Yakubuski. Jim was about my age. All the guys, backline guys, a couple of the LDs, all young guys. All, not maybe if it wasn't their big break, it was their second big break. So the enthusiasm on the crew was amazing. And we got through a day of setting it all up and tuning it and getting all the sounds, and then worked the next day. And then the band came in, and Al came straight to front of house. And Ed ran out first, and he goes, my brother's coming out. He's going to listen to the drums. If he ain't happy, you're going home. Simple as that. I've done all I can for you. I've put my neck on the line for you. Don't let me down. I said, all right. So Ed, unbeknownst to me, he goes and sits 5 rows behind me. Al comes out, and Al knew Mario Lucchesi, my crew chief, from a couple previous tours. So Al's sitting there, he's talking, and he's looking at me, and we hadn't really talked much in rehearsals. And he says, all right, kid, show me what you got. So his drum tech supplies, turned on the drum kit, and I sat down. Turned it on, I just sat down. And, Al gets on the talkback. Let me hear the snare. Let me hear the kick. Roll through the toms, da-da-da. Play the whole kit. And Al looks at me and he goes, good job. And left. And I was like, holy fuck. And Ed came over, gave me the famous Ed Van Halen kiss on the forehead and said, right on. Eddie never came out front ever again, the whole tour. Al came out every fucking day and wanted to work on the snare drum every fucking day. And we were just off and running. I mean, it was, And I'm going to tell you this last story because I think it's funny. The first opening night in Atlanta, about to call house lights, my crew chief, Mario, who's so experienced, I was safe as kittens in his hands. He goes, you ready? And I said, I want you to stand behind me and put your hands up within an inch of my back. He goes, why? I said, because I think I'm going to pass out. He goes, are you serious? I said, yes. Just hold me up. I sat and hung onto the desk for the first 3 songs. Didn't touch a fader. First 3 songs, I just hung on. And then I started mixing. And that's what it was. It was, yeah.
That's fantastic. I've certainly had those moments of, especially first night after pre-production or whatever with a new artist and all that pressure. And I oversold myself for every gig I ever had. That's, you get a call from the next level and absolutely, I can do it. And then you get off the phone, you're like, oh shit, I have to look up all this gear and figure it.
Yeah.
I don't even know what this is. How do we do that?
Yeah.
But, I can imagine on that gig, and I think this is one of the, I don't know, this is like this for anybody, but I think there's an added element to being sober and trying to have mindfulness and be in the moment, you know, no matter what, that with many, you know, with more than one of the artists I work for, there were moments in the set every night, and I'm on the side, you know, most of the gigs I had were these kind of hairy, difficult hot seat guitar tech gigs where you're doing guitar changes every song, you're running effects off stage, or, you know, a ton of tunings, you know, a very thick cue book for the set.
Right.
And so, you know, but after a while you get in rhythm, and it's almost like muscle memory. But that being said, there were certain songs with artists that I would on a nightly basis find myself with chill bumps or have a lump in my throat or have tears in my eyes.
Yes.
And that brings you back to that
Yes.
hook, that early in your life hook. And I can only imagine being the guy with his hands on the faders, mixing Alex and Eddie Van Halen and Mike Anthony.
The solos were amazing. Al was tough doing the drum solo, but mixing, I mean, Ed would do a 15-minute long solo, and you would think there wasn't a lot of mixing involved. But when he would do Cathedral, which was his hammer-ons with the delay, you had to get it because we had a left, center, right, and it was effects in main and drive. And when Ed did it, when I would close my eyes, I could hear tones from his guitar stacked physically. I could hear tones that were coming from the back, not behind me, but behind the stage back there, from the way he would hammer on. And with the lights that were going on, it was emotional. I mean, it was intense. Sammy would do Eagles Fly, and the audience would sing along. The first encore was Jump, and I used to mix on a riser, and my riggers would come out, and we played this game, which was, can I get the bottom end heavy enough tonight where when you looked at my effects rack and my TC-2290s, the digital readouts would bounce because because the optic nerve in your eye was vibrating. And they'd be like, is it a good night? I'm like, yeah, it's a good night. Yeah. And then what Mario would teach me was the last song of the show was Panama, and the house lights would come up. And we would look at the top nosebleed seats. And if they were rocking out up there, then we knew we did our job. And when the show was over, it was, again, I'm still a kid. It was, get your shit packed up, get it to the dasher. Snake better be over there. Your gear better be at the truck in 8.5 minutes flat because the stage is rolling. No time to sit there and go, I'm here to sign autographs and tell me how great it sounded and blah, blah, blah. Fuck that. Get the fucking tapes back to Alex. Get the gear over here. And so I will say yes. Every time I walked in front of house at set change, my ego was in full flare. Look at me. Fucking fuck you, motherfucker. But I hung on to that gig. I remember one night Big Mick and the guys from Metallica came to the show. And I'm like, I better kill this because he's going to steal my gig if I ain't on my shit. What did Mick do? Mick helped me mix it. He helped me pack the console after the show. Like, that's the kind of guy he was. Right. And so that's how it was. You know, it was hard to have your ego, and it was easy to have your ego in check because the guys who ran the show were like, we don't play that. Everyone's interchangeable. But to enjoy it thoroughly, I mean, I work with John Legend now and have been, and I probably cry on an average of once every show.
Yep.
And I think I've always said this, that sound should be a physical experience. The artist is trying to translate something emotional with their music. Even if it's a metal band, it's going to happen. So communicate that with the crowd. I mean, I loved watching the audience walk out of a metal show and they're just soaked in sweat and exhausted. I mean, I can only imagine Pantera shows. Dudes would just be like, I just got my ass beat, you know? And you're a part of that. It's fucking awesome.
Yeah. Having done almost completely, you know, heavier music for the bulk of my career. I did quite a few blues tours, but mostly was in the heavier realm. And I mean, you do those big festival gigs, and there would be bands I wasn't even familiar with. And I'm on the side of the stage doing my job, and some band's on stage, and you hear them play a song, and a riff hits you, and you look out and realize that, oh my God, the crowd knows this band. You know, I don't even have to know the song.
Yeah.
And you see 30,000 kids singing every word to a song. I don't care if they're singing a fucking mayonnaise commercial. It gets you, you know, there's that understanding of that emotional connection that's happening. And, you know, the greatest mix that I ever heard live was opening night of Ozfest in 1998. And I had Clint Lowry, my great friend, was the first guest on the podcast. And we actually talked about this because him and I were standing together. And I was working for Seven Dust, and we were, I think, second or third band on main stage. And Tool was the main support that year. They went on right before Ozzy. And we went out to front of house like halfway through the act before Tool because we wanted to get nestled in and get a spot, you know, behind the console for opening night. And the guy who was mixing Tool, I cannot remember his name, an English guy, and it was his first gig with the band.
Wow.
He was about maybe late 20s.
Wow.
This real big, tall English guy. And they had gotten him from an opening act in Europe that they had just done a European tour, you know, the year before, and they had plucked him from that. And he had done like 2 days of rehearsal.
Wow.
Opening night at Ozfest.
Wow.
And when I tell you that, just like you talk about punching the audience in the face, you know, the sun wasn't even down yet. It's set about halfway through their set, but we're at the PNC, the Homedale, New Jersey, that shed. PNC Arts Center, or whatever it used to be called. And
tough room too.
Oh yeah.
Really tough room.
When I tell you that out of the gate,
wow,
I looked over by the time the first verse hit, you know, pretty long intro. And then by the time Maynard started singing, I looked at Clint because I realized I had chill bumps on my head to my toes and I had tears running down my face. And I looked at him and he was doing the exact same thing.
Wow.
And we both walked up to the engineer afterwards and we're just like, my God. And he goes, and I swear, he was like, was that okay? It's my,
right.
You know,
right.
And of course you've got a great product coming off the stage, which is a huge part of it. But I have certainly seen some incredible bands that were not mixed well. You know,
I always think that most of my career I've been like, God, I hope nobody heard that. But I've probably mixed 500 plus Toto concerts over the 20 years I was with them, and I have maybe 3 shows that stand out. One in particular where I heard the kick drum for about 2 seconds in the PA and talked on it for a minute in the afternoon, and just turned it on and went at a festival in Holland in front of about 50,000 people, and it started, and I didn't know sound could do that. The PA they had brought out. And the audio company looked at me like, oh my God. And I looked at them and like, oh my God. I knew, like, and you just sit there and just go, my first thought is, okay, don't fuck it up. Like, keep it good. And then just enjoy it. It's rare when you get, for me, it's been rare when I get those shows that are like, wow. The best mix I've ever heard was 5 years ago. Was David Gilmour at the LA Forum. Colin Norfield was mixing. And therefore, I'm definitely going to go next month when he's playing the Hollywood Bowl. I've never met Colin, but he did Toto for me in different instances. And hands down, I mean, I had a notepad and paper going, how are you doing that? How is the kick drum and bass fitting like that? I mean, and it was just, it's...
Well, since you just kind of talked about what was possibly the best or the best mix or one of the ones that was high up on the list, what's the worst gig you ever had, or at least, you know, throw out one or two?
We'll narrow it down. Let's talk about Like what? Like the entire show sounded so shitty you wanted to crawl into a hole and die?
Or
Or
do you screwed up? You know, I've shared on other
okay,
episodes about as a guitar tech, it's more glaring.
I got a couple.
And I'll Venmo you $5 if you quit tapping on your desk.
Sorry. Okay, I'm tapping my cigarette because I'm fidgety. First night of Toto on the Gamble EX, opening night. We had this playback intro that went into the thing, which was on in the PA, and then the band started and nothing was on because everything else went through subgroups, and I had all my subgroups muted, and I didn't see all the little red lights at the top, and I panicked halfway. About I don't know, it felt like an hour, but probably 20 seconds into the song, and hit open, and bam. That was one. Richard Marx. I was mixing for Richard Marx earlier. This is a few years earlier, and we had to share consoles. And the guy had used one of my piano mic lines as an effect return and had gained it up or something. And we did the repatch and did a headphone check. And when he got to the piano, I opened it up and the entire building fed back at 200 hertz. For so long that Richard called me in the dressing room and said, I should personally give everybody their money back in the entire arena. It was such a catastrophe. That one haunts me. I've had some panic moments. God, you know what? I had one recently, and it hasn't come to mind. But those panic moments where you're like frozen, and the voice in your head says, "Do something now, hurry!" But I've never had PA fall. I have seen one traumatic something that happened where somebody passed away because of an accident in rehearsals, but I've never seen real tragedy like PAs falling and people getting hurt or having anything like that. Thank God. So yeah.
So I didn't have this written down, but the fact that you spanned from full analog to the digital world now, and from the days of carpeted Shoko boxes to the line arrays of today, are you a guy that's been open to that, to new technology along the way, or are you a crusty old timer who?
I was a crusty old timer when it happened. I was going to be analog till I die, because I was afraid to learn something new.
Until they take all the analog away.
Well, right. Well, I got a good opportunity because I was going out on a Toto tour in 2004, and we were in rehearsals starting right after the NAMM show. And I met Steve McHale, and he said, I can bring you the brand new Avid venue, or what, it was DigiDesign's venue console to mix Toto. And I'm like, I can't learn a new board, dude. It's too, And he said, tell me how you mix. And I was telling him, I'm like, I got to do bus assignments and effects changes. And I'm on. He goes, what if you could do that with a touch of a button? And the board is set up where you can still feel like you're mixing analog. And I said, if you'll come and stay 2 days with me, then I'll do it. So Scoville had the first one, and it was loaded with plugins and everything you wanted at NAMM. And then they brought it over to me, and Steve sat me down for an hour and showed me a bunch of stuff. And then he took a phone call, and a half hour later, he came back to me and I said, I got it. I'm good. And he sat in the corner and just did some work. And I said, how do you do this? Okay. He goes, there's 5 different ways to do anything. And then I got into setting scenes and all that. So I was all in because of the ease of it. The problem I had was now I can actually see how much I'm over EQing stuff. Now I can see what a compressor does. I can see what a gate does. And then it all started making sense. I mean, I started learning really what attack and release really meant, and, compression ratios and all that. And what happened was on analog, I would come at it as a panic mode, especially doing monitors. Oh shit, here we go. With the digital board, you can't do that. You got to think your way through every move. So I found out what happened was I was listening more and relaxing more and just letting it do its thing, and it changed everything.
Yeah.
And now I'm on the S6L, and I won't change because I do not want to learn the Digicos or the Yamaha or the SSLs. Sorry, I'm fucking lazy, but fucking lazy. And I don't miss fixing shit in patch bays and wiring up all those racks. But what's crazy, my production manager and I were just talking the other day, it's gotten to the point where we have more gear now with the digital age than we had in the analog age. Mm-hmm. And way more things are going wrong now that are detrimental to the show than ever before.
Well, I mean, for me being, coming from a guitar tech point of view, the bulk of my career was all tube amps and a bunch of rack effects and pedal boards, and the Bradshaw switching systems were the first kind of intricate switching systems, and then all the others that came behind that, but getting into more MIDI and guitar rigs. But I went out, it was probably, I came off the road in 2007 full time. And I went to a show, it was probably 5 or 6 years after that, with one of the artists I work for, with Seven Dust. And I was hanging out with my buddy Clint, and he introduces me to this guitar tech who's like this pimple-faced kid who they're paying peanuts, but he knew the Kemper or whatever modeling amp, that Clint was using. And Clint's like, check this thing out. And it's a three rack space unit. He's got a main and a backup, and there's nothing else.
Right.
And everything's in it. And all this kid knows how to do is program that unit and what buttons to hit if it goes down, and it completely eliminated my skill set, other than the guitar, taking care of the guitar, having it set up the way the guy likes it, and keeping it maintained that way, which obviously is an additional skill set. But just to see how much, and of course there's still guys out there a lot that are playing tube amps and a rack full of effects and pedals because they're old farts like we are. But I know in the audio world, I remember doing festival gigs with artists, or our monitor engineer and front of house guy are out there. We do a sound check early in the day, and they're out there with a pen and paper charting Yamaha 4K every channel.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And sitting there shaking like a leaf at changeover. You've got 10 minutes to twist every knob. Console back door, and now you just hit a button.
Yeah.
Zoom. Everything's right back. All right. So this term we use with our boys a lot to kind of analyze at the end of a day or at the end of a event or anything. We'll ask for cookies and crumbs. Like in your touring world, what are the looking back at your body of work, or just touring in general? What are your cookies and crumbs? What are the good parts, and what are the things that have been negatives over the years and maybe still are, and what are the good things?
I would say the good things are the people I've worked with. I'm still really close with a lot of the guys from the Van Halen tour. The places I've been, and not only the cities I've been, but what I call CNN moments, where you happen to be in a part of the world that the entire world has attention on. And the opportunities I've had where we've actually made a difference in people's lives. And I could tell you a story that'll bring tears to your eyes if you want to hear it.
Absolutely.
Working with John, he does a lot of activist work. And if you remember about before the pandemic, there was a mass shooting in Dayton, Ohio. And the guy had come from his car and around the corner, and he shot up a bunch of people in front of a bar and then down the street. Well, John grew up an hour from Dayton. So a week later, we had an event in Columbus the next day. So he goes, I want to go to Dayton and I want to go see these people. And I want to go walk the streets and let everyone know it's safe to come out and go shopping again. He goes, and if we can get a piano in the bar, I want to play for him. So I went to the bar And people who had experienced this, who weren't working, were living at the bar because they weren't safe to go home and be alone. And so we brought in a piano. It was a little Soundcraft mixing board with a built-in reverb, 58s that you wouldn't ask your enemy to put their mouth near, and speaker boxes that had so much grunge and dust and shit in it. It was disgusting. And we made it work. And John came in and played an hour and a half on this acoustic piano. And I'm talking big guys, bikers, big men, tough women, holding each other and crying. John opened the set with Here Comes the Sun. 2 songs later, he went into Bridge Over Troubled Water and realized as he started singing what he was singing and cried through the entire song. And I had a woman behind me and her husband, and she was 8 months pregnant, and her husband was the doorman. Still had shrapnel in his leg. And she hugged me and cried, and she said, my baby almost lost her daddy before she even met him. And you've changed our lives because now we can have a little hope and we can go out from here. I emailed John after the set and I said, absolutely amazing. Thank you for letting me be a part of that. We changed lives. And he went, thank you. And I said, and I wrote him back and I said, no, you don't understand. We saved lives tonight. And it was one of the dirtbaggiest venues you could ever imagine doing, with the crappiest gear in the world, and will go down in history as one of the top 3 best shows I've ever done in my life.
Yeah.
Those experiences, doing prisons, going to Iraq with Puddle of Mud to play for the soldiers, I got to do. You would think the sold out shows at my home arena or the biggest crowd would be the ones I remember. No, not at all. It's been those. And then the occasional show where you're sitting there going, I didn't know things could sound this good. The crumbs have been the trauma, the abuse I took from musicians, that I just had to take it because it was part of the job, because of what they were going through and their lack of ability to deal with their problems. The lack of direction in planning for anyone's future. I still think it's a drag that roadies don't have 401ks and health insurance plans for the most part. I'm sure most do. Being away from home. My wife and I made a conscious decision not to have children. I made that decision because I was not going to leave home and leave a little boy looking in the window saying, come home, daddy. I sacrificed that. And so, there's been a lot of crumbs. Nowadays, fast forward, honestly, Brent, all I care about is that everything works. John Legend walks off that stage happy and doesn't have to think about a thing, and nobody got hurt. I kind of can't really give a fuck what it sounds like anymore. I don't care if I get accolades or yelled at. And I've made a decision in my life that I ever have an artist that abuses me, I'm going to tell him to go fuck himself and I'm going to go home.
Yeah.
And I hear about, especially from women, that they're still getting bullied on the road. And I tell them, do what we did in the old days. Gaffer tape that fucker in his bunk. Put a fucking dildo in his bag before he flies home. Fight back. Don't take, it's just a fucking job. It's just a fucking job.
Yeah.
And it's not worth it. And it's a miracle more people don't get hurt and suffer in the industry. I mean, I know it's come a long way. I'm being a little over dramatic about the whole goddamn thing.
Yeah.
But I tell people, you're going to experience things that you didn't know. You asked me earlier, one of my first gigs, the first rehearsal I ever got to work on in the sound company was a benefit concert. And I sat in this room as people like Don Henley walked in the room. Joni Mitchell walked in the room. Russ Kunkel, Jeff Porcaro, Warren Zevon. I went over to get coffee and watched Don Felder take out his white double neck guitar out of the road case and tune it. The one he wrote, the solo of, Hotel California. I met President Obama 3 times. Like, you don't know where you're going to go. You can't imagine what you're going to experience. I mean, we got this election coming up. My boss could be singing the inauguration. I have no idea. Like, you just don't know. You know what I mean? And so, it never gets old.
Yep.
I mean, it's you know, you could do the NFL. I stood next to the friggin' Lombardi Trophy at the Super Bowl
Yep.
one year. And the greatest of all time was the 100th NHL anniversary. LA, they had the All-Star game, and I sat stage left while all the greatest hockey players who ever played the game walked by me. I mean, Esposito and Bobby Hull and Brett Hull and Gordie Howe. And you know what I mean? Like,
Yep. That stuff's not on the brochure when you sign up, you know.
no.
And to me, I'm a sports fanatic, and getting to do, like, one of the last artists I worked for before I quit touring was Stained, and in 1 year we did the Daytona 500, the Indy 500, and the Super Bowl. And the Super Bowl was a private party. We didn't play the actual game. We played the night before a big Budweiser party in Tiger Stadium in Detroit. But you know, as a sports kid and a grown-up sports kid, those benefits are, you know, great memories,
Yeah.
and those connections made. And overall, you know, for me, the cookies from both of my careers and from anything in life are the connections that are made.
Yeah.
That's it. You know, the job's the job, and just like you say, you don't. The, I'm not. It's not about remembering, you know, how good your mix was one night, or how I
Right.
nailed every single cue in the set for 100 shows in a row. It's the friendships I made and the things I got to witness of other people. You know, like the significant moments you talked about, and
Yeah.
we all have, to
Yeah.
some degree, have those.
Yeah.
What did your wife put you to talk about?
You want an honorable mention?
And
My
it's so true that if you have been touring for 38 years, you don't, you know, that you don't achieve anything without support. And
right.
it's such a, just to have a marriage survive as a touring professional
Yeah.
is, speaks to your character to some degree, you
Well,
know.
my wife grew up in the business. Her father was in the record business, and she grew up around a lot of famous people and was very close with a lot of famous people. So she's unfazed by that, you know. I mean, I once watched her after a show. She sat with me at the Hollywood Bowl. She walked right up to Quincy Jones and said, "I want to introduce myself. I'm Artie Mogul's daughter." And they had a 10-minute conversation. You know, like she gets it, and so she knew what she signed up for.
Yeah.
She knew I was a roadie. She knew I was, you know, she's also in recovery. We actually met in an AA meeting, which is another miracle story, just like the VH story. I wasn't supposed to be there. And we've had our ups and downs. Uh, it hasn't been extremely difficult. Say what, babe? No, it was never really about the distance and being apart. We signed on to the distance absence makes the heart go stronger. And if I hadn't toured, we probably wouldn't have stayed married.
Yeah.
The downside was that she didn't like to be alone, so she would adopt a couple more animals every time I went on tour. So, you know, you fast forward, we had 9 or 10 animals at one point living in Colorado. But it's a little scarier now because we're older, you know, and I'm almost 60 and she's a few years older than me. So it does get a little scarier of when I go out on tours, I show my tech everything I'm doing, because if the phone rings, I'm out of here. I'm
Be
fucking
ready.
gone. I'm gone. And so that's the scary part about it. But Allison will say, if there's any wives or girlfriends who are giving their old man shit about being gone, you don't want to talk to my wife because she'll lay you out. Like, don't get in the way of their dreams, you know? Handle the house. She'll never tell me if things are bad when I'm gone because she doesn't want me to worry, you know? She supports everything I do, but at the same time, she doesn't like coming to shows because I'm a real nervous wreck and pain in the ass. You know, I don't give her any attention. And then there's shit you don't want to see. Like when I was out doing Sammy Hagar, I did Sam for 6 years, 2000 to 2006. And this is back when he probably still does, I don't know. When he would have, the Wabarita shows, he'd be having these strippers being cocktail waitresses. And Allie came to a show in Vegas, and I'm like, oh, fuck, she's going to see that. And we're walking backstage, and here come the three strippers to get their, their instructions on how to do their job. And of course, my wife ends up in a conversation with one of them, and they're exchanging recipes. You know what I mean? Like you just, you gotta come from the right mold of character to be involved in it. But the family side of things is tough. I don't know how you guys do it with kids. That's tough.
Well, my first marriage didn't survive touring, so
I saw a lot of that.
that's
Yeah.
I want to change gears a little bit and circle back to
good
recovery stuff.
Yeah.
At what point, because I know it kind of manifested in other ways in your life, at what point in your touring career did gambling become an issue? And was there a whole second bottom with that?
There was. And I'd actually hit a second bottom in life, which was a breakup and losing a big tour, getting fired and losing a house, which was when I came home and just did a year of recovery. And then at the end of that, I met my wife. Gambling, I'm going to say from the first time I gambled when I was 21, probably even younger, I was addicted. I was compulsive. And then as venues started popping up in casinos, and that became more of a part of the circuit. I was out with the Beach Boys for a couple of years, and we did a lot of casinos, and so I was gambling a lot more often. And then, I don't know when I crossed the line, but I became a gambler on the road where I would lose my per diem before I even got to the counter to get my hotel key to check in. I was that guy. And then I would go to another hotel to get money out of the ATM because God forbid any roadies saw me hitting the ATM 10 minutes after we got our per diem. And then it got to the point where I would stay up all night and go right from the slot machine to a load-in. Or one night in particular at the Beach Boys show after sound check, I went and played slots, and I hit a jackpot, and I hit cash out, and I had to wait for the woman to come over and pay me. And the show was starting in 5 minutes. And I was mixing in front of the house, and I literally grabbed my cash, ran through the door, and hit on as the house lights dropped. Putting my job at risk. And then we were out on tour, and you and I had mentioned this earlier, because I didn't have a lot of touring experience with other guys in the program, but with Brian Setzer, our guitar tech was sober a long time, Skip Gildersleeve, and there was one morning he walked by me on the way to load in, and he saw me still at a machine at 8 a.m. And he looked at me and he goes, "You've got a serious fucking problem." And I was like, holy shit. And the light came on. And a month later, I went to a GA meeting. And then I had about 6 months clean, and we went back on tour together. And I was watching one of the roadies play slot machines, right? I'm 6 months without a bet, admitted compulsive gambler, and I'm watching somebody else play slot machines, right? And Skip walked up to me and he whispered in my ear, he goes, "When I quit shooting heroin, I didn't go down to the hood and watch other people shoot heroin." And I went, good point. Okay. So I haven't had a bet in 21 years. And it is hard it's harder to be in casinos now doing jobs than it is being around people who are smoking weed or doing coke.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of that. Yeah.
Well, you've already talked about John Legend. How long you been on the gig? How did you end up there?
I've been with him over 15 years. We got to go back to 2008, mid-November 2008. Sound Image got the account, and one of the guys got hurt loading the truck. And so my buddy called me and said, "You want to come out and hang PA and be monitor tech with this guy, John Legend?" And I said, yeah. I was starving. I was broke. I needed to work. And the money was shit. And I was 40 41, and I worked harder than I'd ever worked. And a few months into the gig, their monitor engineer, Paul Clemson, was trying to get a job with the Roots on Jimmy Fallon's new TV show in New York. And so he was interviewing for that, and he got the job and handed the monitor engineer gig to me, which I turned down at first because I don't do monitors. I'm a front of house guy. And then I realized that John Legend never looked over at him in 15, 20 shows, never asked for a thing. The band did all night long, but he would just give him the finger. And I said, God, an artist who doesn't even bother the monitor engineer? I said, yeah, I'll take the gig. And I had to kind of teach myself how to do ears. And so we started in Europe. 6 months later, we did a tour. We started in Europe. We did rehearsals. We did 4 shows. I walked past John at the hotel, and he didn't know who I was. He'd been staring at me for 4 shows in a row. He didn't know who I was. And I'm like, this is my guy. This is my guy. You mean I'm not going to get yelled at in the dressing room every night because I missed a cue or you couldn't hear your voice in one song? And so I've been with John 15 years, and it started early where, let's put it this way. John Legend was the first artist in my career where everything lined up when the job came along. I understood the psychology behind what we do. I understood the business side of what we do. I understood the audio side of it. I had experience, far more experience than the band and the artist. And I was past the ego thing of who's next. And I wanted somebody younger with longevity. And the funniest thing was I actually prayed. I said, God, give me an artist who's got longevity without the pressure. And John came along. And 2 years later, my name was in the hat to do monitors for Rush on the R40 tour, R30 tour. And I thought, this is my calling. And I didn't get the gig. In the last hour, I didn't get the gig. And it took me 3 more years with John to realize God answered my prayer perfectly. And when the pandemic started, John called us and said, you're going to continue with your retainer. I got you no matter how long it lasts. I'm paying the band 50% of what they would have made and the crew for the canceled tour. And we're going to work. So I need you to learn how to do a few things with this Zoom thing. And we're going to keep going. And so, yeah, I literally have the best job in the industry right now. And I'm just a monitor guy. I get to mix house once in a while when he's solo. I mix front of house and ears from front of house, so I get that. I get to get off on front of house mixing still, and it gets back to what we talked about before. I get to do things with Legend, that I never know what's next. You know what I mean? And He's a really fucking good guy. He's a solid good guy. Yeah.
What advice would you give anybody starting out now?
Ask a lot of questions. Stay teachable. Act as if, fake it till you make it sometimes. I would say whoever you piss off today, you're going to run into them down the road.
Today's opening act is tomorrow's headliner.
Yes. Yes. I fucked up mixing for a woman, an opening act when I was young. I put a lot of reverb and delay on her voice, and she hated me and would never use me again. That woman turned out to be Melissa Etheridge. You never know. At the same time, live your best life. Go all in. I would actually like to see people, and I don't know because I'm not involved in the big world right now of the 50 truck, 20 bus extravaganzas that are going on. But I would say be a lifer. Go all in. Start your 401ks. Make sure you're planning for the future. You know what I mean? And you got a day off in whatever city, go see everything you can see. Go all in. And enjoy every fucking moment of it. And yeah, let your ego. I mean, how do you walk around on a Taylor Swift tour with a backstage pass, meaning you can go anywhere you want without an ego? I mean, I can dig it. And I wish I would have kept a ledger and a journal. I would have wish I would have tracked my travel over the last 38 years. and to see, you know, how many cities I'd been to and stuff like that. And I think nowadays, I think really the most important thing I would tell somebody, I just thought of this, is be aware of your fellow road crew, because you might save a life. You know, you might be able to help somebody. They used to tell me when I was young, if you see a lighting guy climb the ladder and nobody's holding the bottom, I don't care what you do, run over and step on that ladder.
Yep.
You know, when you're done loading audio, go help wardrobe. You know, if my production manager were to watch this, he'd laugh, going, "You don't fucking do that." Take care of yourself physically.
Yep.
You know, don't shit on the bus. I would tell audio guys, go to as many shows as you can, listen to as many different engineers as you can, and remember, here's my fear of live sound. My fear is that it's moving into a realm of the right way to mix and the wrong way to mix, and I don't agree with that. I think if you're a really good engineer, you can adapt a style to fit the band and bring your little bit of whatever to that. But I think, especially with the equipment we have, we can think outside the box and try insane shit, and guys are trying crazy shit, which I love. But take sound to a whole nother level, you know? Like, if it can, I'm going to get a little hippy-dippy trippy on you, but, you know, there were guys back in the day who would see colors. They could see sound in colors, right? I can see sound in a three-dimensional way. You know, I believe I can make an artist appear bigger than life by how they sound. And my goal is I want one person to walk up to me in the audience and just go, "How the fuck did you do that?" Because they got the home stereos and the car stereos that sound fucking amazing, and they know quality, you know? So yeah, and I think there's a lot of opportunity. I mean, you know, there's so many more opportunities now. You know, guys can learn the wireless world, or just being a successful, happy system engineer without ever mixing, you know? And so I just think the trap is getting into that ego because of what tour you did. I mean, you know, you could do Taylor Swift. I don't give a fuck. You're making the same money somebody else is making doing the club tour. You know what I mean? You are not that guy, you know? And yeah. That's enough on that. It's a good question.
You have anything left to achieve in work, or you're happy on the gig on Legend until you walk into the sunset?
I do. I don't know what it is. I said once to my Allison in 06, I said, I just mix my best show I'll ever mix. My best mixing's behind me. But then I'll go to a show and I'm like, oh, can I mix David Gilmour? Can I mix that? Can I just do those 10 shows and have the stadium tour that sounds absolutely perfect? I'd like to do that. Not him per se, but there's a couple places in the world I want to go to that I haven't seen yet. And I haven't gotten a massive bonus. I still want one of those.
I remember back in when it was in the 90s, and I was on a tour with a guy who had been doing Garth Brooks for several years, and he was on one of his hiatuses. But when he initially stopped touring, after his long run of stadiums for years, and this is the myth from back in the day is he gave his front of house engineer the PA, which he owned, and he gave his lighting guy the lighting rig that he owned.
Jesus.
And he owned, if not all of them, a lot of the buses and trucks as well. And he gave his lead driver a bunch of the buses. And
wow.
And at least that was the story we all heard. I never did confirm from any of them, but I
Right.
did work with the guy who said he got a life-changing bonus, like a life-changing amount of money for Christmas one year.
Yeah.
And I never landed on one of those. never ended up on one of those, but
I know. I still hope Legend will throw me the keys to his Ferrari. You know.
Yeah.
or drop the big Rolex box or something.
Well, I don't know, man. Like we were going to do this. I've kind of been on a break from doing this podcast because I had a surgery and had a lot going on. And we attempted to do this, I think about 6 or 8 weeks ago, and you had some shows pop up, and then one day through a group text, I see you're like, oh, I'm mixing a show in Pompeii tonight. And
Yeah.
I'm just like, what? Like we were going to do this little podcast, and then you had all of a sudden, oh, I got to do a gig in Pompeii. So, I think you're still checking some pretty strong boxes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just a couple of weeks ago, same thing. We had talked. I was like, "Hey, are you busy this next week?" And you kind of didn't get back to me. And then I walked by the TV and the Democratic National Convention's on, and I see Legend on stage. I'm like, "Oh."
My buddy texted me during rehearsals, and he goes, "You wearing jeans and a blue sport coat?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Don't pick your nose. You're on CNN." And I'm like, "All right, I mean, you don't, yeah."
Yeah.
And
I texted you right after, it wasn't even over yet. I texted you and heard back, and like, oh, okay, I guess that upstages this little podcast with.
And what's so jaded about it, but I want to roll into another part of the conversation is that if I go tell my friends over here, yeah, this week was L.A. to St. Louis to Atlanta to Cincinnati to London and home in 8 days, they're like, what? But you tell a roadie that, and they're like, hey, yeah, sounds about right.
It's an easy week.
Yeah, like next week I'm going to Tokyo. I got 3 days off after the gig, and then we're going to a few cities in China, Jakarta, Hawaii, and then home. And like feel like, what? You doing what? Huh? And I'm like, yeah. And then I'll probably see a buddy of mine who's on tour in Tokyo, and we'll go have dinner and catch up, yada yada yada. But
well, to kind of land this thing, I want to bring it back to how I met you. And
yes, yeah,
you started a group during COVID called Roadies in Recovery, and I only bring it up by name because it's not a specific 12-step group,
right.
but a group of roadies who are recovering from many things.
Right.
And it's the first time I've ever been, and I think the Zoom age and COVID and, just in the as fast as technology is moving, the world has become so much more connected in a lot of ways. And of course, divided in many ways as well. We won't go, I'm not focusing on that, but the fact that, I think I started coming to the group about 4 years ago now, through a friend and another, no longer touring, but ex roadie buddy of mine who's in recovery. And he said, hey man, check this group out. And, these are people, you're one of them that have become a part of my life through that. And I have grown because of that group and made connections and had my eyes open to stuff because it's not one specific, disease concept that it sticks to. It's across a lot of things. And it's been a good deal in my life. And you started that, and I know what we already touched on, to think back to, for me in the early 90s, going on tour with an AT&T calling card in my pocket. Like I didn't even have a pager.
Right.
And I would try to call one of my sober buddies at home every couple of days from a payphone. Yeah. Call my sponsor once a week from a payphone. Yeah. That was the extent of my recovery on the road. And when you're on these young tour, up and coming band tours, doing 7 shows a week, I wasn't making meetings. And to think about today, just how different it looks and how much more is available. And I know that this one group has been that for a lot of people. And we've watched people come in and get clean in that group. Yeah. During COVID. Yeah. Just totally in that group. Find recovery. It's been awesome to watch. Yeah. So that's where I know you from, and I know that it's something that means a lot to you. You and a couple others started it, right? Yeah. What was the initial connection there? So
the backstory is this. When the pandemic hit mid-March, I think it wasn't a week later, I was basically on the couch thinking, okay, I'm going to die. I better write a will. I'm never going to work again like everybody else did, da-da-da. And I was fortunate enough to find out that I'm going to be covered financially. And I'm home now. And within a couple of weeks, I was like, there's no date on the calendar that says John leaves. So now I started relaxing. And GA started Zoom meetings very quickly. And I was going to 3 a week. And then I started Zooming into a meeting that I was going to in Colorado. And I would see my old friends there. Then I got invited to a Music Cares Zoom meeting. And then I started going to some AA meetings. And I was doing between 7 and 10 meetings a week, which I had not done that kind of regimen since I got sober. And over the 3 months, the benefits were phenomenal. I went to a doctor. I got myself checked out physically. I built an herb garden. I was living. I was like, I haven't had this in 30 some years. And then come August, when word that we were going to start pulling out of this thing and get back on the road, I got really freaked out because I thought, how am I going to go back on the road and not have this consistently? And it hit me. I was like, well, Zoom meetings are going to go away and everyone's going to go back to in-person meetings. So I'm screwed. And I thought, wait, who will keep using Zoom? Roadies. It was as simple as that. And I thought, what if we had meetings with roadies could Zoom in? And I thought, okay, we had a 5 o'clock meeting on whatever, a Friday. 5 o'clock's usually a decent time after sound check before show. Well, what if they're on the East Coast? That's 8 o'clock. What if I wasn't even thinking out of the country yet. So I thought, okay, why don't we do 2 a week? 1 at 5 on the West Coast, 1 at 5 on the East Coast. So I called my friend Alana, who I've known for 30 years, who had toured for a while, but she had more extensive experience in starting meetings and working in rehabs and doing intake and whatnot. So I called Alana and I said, I got an idea, Roadies in Recovery. She goes, I love it. Let's do it. And we called another friend of hers. I can't remember his name. It'll come to me. And I said, okay, we need to come up with a format. So we got together on the phone a couple times, thought of some ideas, wrote a format, kind of copied one from another friend. And by now I was getting the benefits of talking about my emotional stuff in recovery with other people in the business because I was going to a couple meetings. And I said, okay, the only rule is it's roadies only, no musicians allowed because we need a safe space. And so she said, okay, when do you want to start? And I said, I don't know, a few months. She goes, no, we're going to start in 2 weeks. And Courtney Clemson gave us through the Roadie Clinic, gave us a Zoom account, and we went on Facebook. And I found this group, Friends of Bill W. And I posted a little flyer we put together, and that we were starting on October 15th on a Friday at 5 o'clock. And 2 people showed up, and there were 4. So there were 4 of us in the meeting. And in that meeting, I won't break any anonymity. I was sharing about what I go through as a monitor engineer. And I have 12 musicians, and I have 1 musician who's not happy with his mix. And I avoid that guy, and he lives rent-free in my head, and I get resentful, and I'm hiding, and all. And one of the guys is sitting in the meeting going like this. I'm a guitar tech. I do the same thing. And I was like, oh my God, I've never connected with somebody on the road about something that specific about what we do. So we're going to fast forward 4 years, because next month, it's 4 years. We have meetings in the UK. We have members in the UK, a couple in Australia, a couple in Canada. What I never expected, I'm going to tell you honestly, I did it for personal reasons. I did it so I'll have a place to go on the road. What has come out of it is people have gotten sober and stayed sober. People have saved their marriages. People have ended their marriages. People have put time together and now are sponsoring newcomers. It has expanded to LGBTQ, trans, underage people who are retired, people who are no longer in the business, the roadie adjacents, we'll call it. And I've let go of a lot of it. I'm just a member. Everybody else is. See, I'm not smart. I don't know how to make the online phone lists. I don't know how to make the WhatsApp group. I don't know how to do all that stuff. And I've had the privilege, except you and I haven't met face to face. I've met over 20 of us face to face in the last 4 years. And most of the audience that you and I have on this podcast are members of our program. So I'm going to share one touching moment that she doesn't know happened, but she might. Was one of our gals called me one day and I was driving and she said, I just want to tell you, if it wasn't for Roadies in Recovery, I don't think I'd be alive today. And I told her, I said, at the end of my career, if it's 45 years and someone says, what is the one thing you're most proud of, your achievement in the industry, I would say Roadies in Recovery, hands down. And what it has done for me, I now go on the road and do jobs and I'm healthy. I'm not angry. I'm helping people. I'm better at my job. My relationship with my wife has never been better. I don't dread the date of leaving. I mean, and I'm just starting for the first time in my life, in my career, in my recovery, to apply that to this. And what's next is I was on a Zoom earlier with one of our women who's going to be presenting a panel at Rock Lidditz in December. And so now we want to take it the step further of abiding by the traditions of being attraction, not promotion. And I told her, I said, if you have 5,000 people there and one person walks up and says, I've been sober 6 months and I've been struggling on the road and I need this, that's the whole point of it. You know, because everyone who has found us, I've only brought like 1 or 2 people. Everybody else has brought people in from all over the place, you know, whether it's they see the T-shirt or they just see the logo or they're talking or whatever. So it's actually this phenomenon that that Alana really pushed me towards, and I did it for personal reasons, selfish reasons, really. And I like to tap in a little bit to take a moment to see how it's benefit others. But I really want to convey the message that everybody who comes to our meeting has saved my life and given me a whole new way of living. And for that, I'm not only eternally grateful, but, you know, I owe the ends of the earth to. And it's funny because it gets back to what we first started talking about. You know, my sponsor and my therapist told me originally, you're going to tour because you're dealing with childhood traumatic issues of abandonment. And you're going to stop touring when you recover from that. And I think that's what's really going on in my life. Allison asked me last night, when do you think you're going to hang it up? And I said, I think I'm going to hit a point like with these cigarettes where I'm going to go, I'm done.
Yeah.
So I'm on that journey. That's the journey. That it's not about the perfect mix at all. It's about the opposite. It's about something totally different.
I know for me, at the end of the day, I have a disease that's going to attack me any way it can. And the more miserable I am, the happier, the happier that demon is.
Yeah.
And what works, the solution is no different than the day I came in, or the day the first 2 guys back in the 30s figured out how to attack this thing back. Yeah. And it is so absolutely simple. Yeah. It's just one person connecting with another person and sharing that experience, strength, and hope. Yeah. And hope being the biggest of that. And so I'm grateful for Roadies in Recovery because it's absolutely benefited me in my life. And I quit touring, 16 years ago.
But you've contributed so much because of your length of recovery and and where you got sober and bringing in the experience of that old school AA that translates with that same attitude like the older guys have of quit fucking around and get to business. You want to stop being fucking miserable? Quit doing what you're fucking doing. Quit your crying and get fucking to work. And roadies understand that language.
Yep.
Suck it up, bitch. Let's go. We're doing 5 in a row.
I'm telling you, I've told this story a million times, but in 1990, I was 18 years old. I'd just done my first little punk rock tour in my own band. I knew everything. I was Mr. Recovery. I went to 20 meetings a week. And I was sitting in the middle of the afternoon in between meetings at this old AA club arguing with really one old timer, but there were four of them sitting on this old couch in the AA club. We called it Death Row, where all the old timers sat. And this guy, Riley Bird, he's been gone for years and years now. But I was making my point about something. I don't know what it was in all of my 18-year-old genius. And he just started dying laughing, like right through the middle of my spiel. And I was sitting in a chair in front of the couch, and he slid up on the end of the couch, knees to knees with me, and looked me dead in my face. And he goes, "Would you shut the fuck up?" He's just laughing. He said, "Son, you somehow got it in your head that you have to believe in this for it to work."
Right.
He said, "You don't.
Right.
Just shut up and do what we're telling you to do, and your whole life will get better. It'll be better for you and for everybody around you."
Yeah.
And it's that simple. But if I don't show up, and that's my responsibility, that's where our responsibility lies. If I don't show up and take that action today to save my own life,
right,
then I get in the weeds fast. And it doesn't matter. Like in my case, if I make it till next week, it'll be 35 years since the last time I picked up. But that doesn't matter at all. I crawled in a hole of depression last week for 2 days, and I couldn't even tell you what it was about.
We need this more now than we did when we were young. So yesterday we had a meeting, and one of our members was sharing about another sound guy, that it was first show of his tour, opening act on a huge arena tour, and his console crashed over and over and over again, and he was fucked, and he freaked and panicked, and he asked the audio crew chief of the tour for help, and another guy, and they ended up getting him back online, and he told the band honestly what was going on, because he was mixing monitors from front of house, and he was terrified, and he asked for help, and they got it working. And it turns out the other audio guy he asked for help is sober X amount of years. And then it turns out somebody else on their crew is sober X amount of years. And then it turns out that the artist he is working for, who's a young gal, whose mother is out there, is sober 20 plus years and came to the meeting. And to me, I'm sitting here going, I see God's work crystal clear. Now, the greatest thing that ever could have happened to you was your console crashed. He didn't see it as clearly because he's only been with us about 6 months to a year, but he probably has by now today.
Yeah.
And that's the perfect analogy for how this works. It sums up everything you and I have been talking about all day. You know, how do I know Eddie Van Halen's going to walk through the door and a year later I'm going to be working for him? You know, I mean, when I was 26, I walked in rehearsal and this long blonde haired guy walks up to me and goes, "Hey man, welcome. My name is Sammy Hagar." 7 years earlier, I walked into rehab with a Sammy Hagar concert baseball jersey that was ripped into shreds, and that was my outfit. Like, don't tell me there's no fucking higher power, you know? Forget it.
And to kind of land this thing, I was on that same Ozfest in 1998, and it was the first tour I was ever on. I was, 7 years into my career at that point. It was the first tour I'd ever been on where we had a meeting on the tour. And we had a meeting in a dressing room of one of the main bands. And I'm not going to blow any anonymity, but there were members of 3 bands on that bill that if you backed up 10 years when old punk rock headbanger Brent was in full-blown active addiction, terrorizing the streets of North Louisiana, the soundtrack to that blasting out of my car was those 3 bands.
Right. Of course.
And fast forward 10 years and I'm sitting in meetings on every show day with these band guys that wrote all these songs.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about the lyrical content of their songs. Right. We're talking about recovery and maintaining connection and being responsible, taking an active role and accountability and trying to save our own lives. And
and you find you say something in a meeting that makes somebody go, wow, I really needed to hear that. I had a Monday night meeting where a woman said that to me. Wow, I really needed to hear what you had to say. That really helped. The night before, she had just won one of the biggest Grammys of the year. You know?
Yeah.
It's like, and it's so freeing to know that we're all the same. I mean, it ain't going to happen with a lot of the artists we work with, but
Yeah.
maybe some, All right.
All right. I appreciate this, John. We could keep going and going, but I've got carpool to go sit in.
Well, and everybody stopped listening an hour ago, so it doesn't matter anyhow.
That's great. All right. Thanks to everybody that stuck around. Jono, I love you. Thank you for doing
too,
this.
buddy. Great job.
I appreciate your friendship and
great work. Yeah, you too.
And thanks, bud.
Later.